everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we're here to do a mid-year check-in and the mid-year book freakout tag, a time-honored tradition on BookTube. So far this year, I feel like 2025 I have been reading more, or at least more consistently than in some previous years. The last couple years I've kind of been struggling with my reading, but this year I have been generally feeling pretty good about reading. I haven't had a lot of outstanding high highs with my reading this year. I've had a few standouts, but it's not like the first half of the year has been incredible, but it's been solid. I have been just solidly enjoying a lot of things. There have also been a lot of DNFs, but part of that is because I was doing my TBR clear out project. We don't measure success by the number of DNFs, right? Measure of success is by how consistently I'm reading, not necessarily how much, but how consistently I am reading and how much I am enjoying those reads. I do have a sneaking suspicion that the second half of the year may be even better because there are some books, especially some new releases, but also some backlist books I'm planning to read in the second half that I think are going to be fantastic. So I have a suspicion that the second half of the year is going to be even better. But we're here to talk about first half of the year. So in the first half of 2025, at the end of June, as of the end of June, I have read 38 books, which is just about where I was expecting to be at this point. Also, I think my neighbor is mowing their lawn, so hopefully you can't hear that. But 38 is just about where I was expecting to be around mid-year. The way I do my Goodreads goal every year is that I make my Goodreads goal about half of what I expect to read for the year. So I usually expect to hit my Goodreads goal about mid-year. My Goodreads goal for 2025 was 40 books, so I'm only 2 books behind. So I'm right about where I expected to be, which is really great. And then I'm just gonna keep going, and I'm expecting to read close to 80 books this year in total. I also made some good progress on my TBR clear out project. I have multiple videos about this now, but in summation, my TBR clear out project that I started at the beginning of the year, I was planning for it to be a full year project that I kind of sprinkled in. I finished it in the first 6 months, which is really great. And there were a lot of DNFs, but that's okay. The goal was to just make a decision about all of those books, and I have now made a decision about every single one. And I have also decided to continue the project, move on to the next set of oldest books on my shelf, and I have a bonus round for my TBR clear out project for the second half of the year. So I'm still hoping to get to all 8 of those books, but to me it's a little more loose as to whether I get to them or not, because I have already accomplished my real goal, and this is just a bonus, whatever I'm able to get to before the end. So now let's get into the actual questions for the mid-year book freakout tag. Question 1 is, what is the best book that you've read so far this year? And I have 2 answers because I have a reread answer and a new answer. So my reread answer is, of course, The Lost Queen by Signe Pike. Really, it's my reread of the first 2 books in this series. The 3rd book came out at the end of last year. I did a reread of the first 2 books and then continued on into the 3rd book, and I just loved rereading these. I mean, these are some of my favorite books. The writing in them is so beautiful and atmospheric, especially in this first book. I think the first book is probably my favorite of the series, especially because it is a more intimate story where you have a connection to a single character as you're following Lengoreth, and as the series continues, the story kind of expands, and so I love that intimacy that you get in the first book. I also think the writing is the most beautiful in this first book, so I loved rereading this, and this is the first time that I have reread these books, so it was great to know that they were still just fantastic on reread, and that is definitely a mark of a great book for me. For a new book, I had a hard time deciding what was my best book of the new things that I have read. For right now, I am going with Troubled Waters by Sharon Shin. This is the first book in the Elemental Blessing series. Even though I didn't love this series as a whole, I did love this first book. This one was so fun to read. I think this is a really interesting world. I like her writing. It's just very like readable and digestible, and I like some of the characters that she creates. In this one, there is just like the whisper of a romance that for, you know, like 40+% of the book, you're like, is anything happening? Or am I imagining this? And I love that type of thing. And I think that doing kind of a whisper of a romance is really where she shines. Some of the later books where there's a more overt romance, I didn't love as much because I just don't think that's her forte, but the very subtle romance I think is fantastic. I had other issues with the rest of the series. I can't say I love the series as a whole, but I did love this first book, and I did think that this first book was free of some of those issues that came up later in the series. So this one kind of still has a really very like positive place in my mind. Question 2 is, what has been your favorite sequel of the first half of the year? Once again, I have a reread answer and a non-reread answer. My favorite reread sequel was, of course, The Forgotten Kingdom by Signe Pike. This is the second book to The Lost Queen, and loved rereading this. And in particular, I think I loved this exponentially more on reread than I did the first time I read it. So this is just a fantastic sequel and pairs so well with the first book. My other favorite sequel is Painted Devils by Margaret Owen. This is the second book in the Little Thieves series, and one that I got in just under the wire at the end of June. This is a YA series that is following Vanya, who is a thief and a con artist. In the first book, she is running a long con where she has taken the identity of a princess, and just as she is about to end this con and win her freedom, she's cursed by a god, and there is now a investigator after her who might be the only one who is truly able to see through her shenanigans and be the one to catch her. And the first book, I struggled with the first half of the book and then really ended up enjoying the second half, so I continued on with the series. The second book, I just had so much fun with. I love the relationship in this series. There is always kind of like a mystery that they're solving, which are fun to watch, but the relationship that forms in this series and is very center stage in the second book, I just adore. It is so awkward. It like just the amount of awkwardness that just radiates off of these characters is immense. But I love it. I love the two of them together, and I love how earnest they are together and how much they, through this relationship, they are working through a lot of like emotional issues that each of them has. How much they like check in with each other and talk about things and really talk about like what are they comfortable with and ready for, and they don't just go 0 to 60 in the relationship. Like, it was such a great sequel. Like, I loved this book and these characters and this relationship so much. Question 3, is there a new release that you haven't read yet but want to? I am gonna have to go with Mercy Makers by Tessa Gratton. This is the first book in a new series that she is starting that is a adult fantasy series. Her first adult fantasy since the Innis Lear duology, so I am very excited to have another adult series from her. I believe the main character in this may also be a con artist of some sort. I know that she uses a heretical magic, but she must choose between, you know, power and love. It just sounds like it is going to be really interesting. I don't know too much about it, but I kind of don't want to know too much because I want to just go in and experience it for what it is without too many expectations. I already have a lot of expectations for this because I have loved things from this author, and I am trying very much to temper those expectations, but I am very excited about this. Question 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I have multiple videos about my anticipated releases, so I have a full list of my most anticipated releases. I also have a short about my top 3 most anticipated releases. My number 1 is probably The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. It is one of the many Lady Night books coming out this year, but it is the one that I am truly most excited about. What is your biggest disappointment so far this year? I feel like I have had quite a few disappointments this year, especially because I've had so many DNFs. So I have both a DNF answer and also a book that I finished answer. So my DNF answer is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I really wanted to love this book. It is so beloved. The way that it is described and pitched sounds like something that I would love, and yet I just really did not enjoy it. There are many aspects that did not work for me. One is just, the writing style and narration structure just really didn't land for me, and that's a personal preference. But I also had issues with the way that the characters were written. I thought many of them were very flat and two-dimensional, and lacked a lot of complexity or nuance to them. And I also had issues with the way the female characters were written and the way that essay was dealt with in the story. My most disappointing read for a book that I actually finished, so this is not necessarily the worst thing that I have read, but I had high expectations and it just did not meet those, so it was disappointing, is The Amber Owl by Juliet Marillier. Juliet Marillier, one of my favorite authors of all time. I have loved her books for so long, and so I generally have very high expectations for her books and her writing. The Amber Owl just did not meet those expectations. Honestly, the story structure and the writing didn't even feel like a Juliet Marillier book. Her books and her writing have a distinct feel to them to me, and this just didn't even feel like a book from this author. So it was very both confusing and disappointing. As I said, it's not that it's the worst thing that I read. I finished it, I gave it 3 stars, but it certainly did not live up to my expectations for it. What is your biggest surprise so far this year? As always, I have 2 answers. So one of my biggest surprises was my reread of The Forgotten Kingdom by Signe Pike. I know I've already talked about this, but this was very significant to me and a surprise to me because I loved it so much more on reread. The first time I read this book, I felt pretty neutral about it, I guess. And I was kind of disappointed by that because I had loved the first book so much. But I think that part of the issue when I read this the first time was that I had let some time elapse between the first and the second book. Rereading it and rereading it immediately after the first book just enhanced this book so much. I loved this on reread, and yeah, I think reading it back to back with the first book is really the way to go, and just pairing them together as if you're just reading one long book. At least that's the way to go for me, because it made such a difference in my enjoyment. So this was really a surprise. Even though it was a reread, I was surprised by how different my reading experience was on reread and how much I loved it the second time around. This was fantastic. My answer for a new to me book is Year of the Reaper by Makia Lucier. So I read this in January. It has been on my shelf for a while. This is a book that I knew almost nothing about and had 0 expectations going into it. I picked it up because it was blurbed by Juliet Marillier, and I don't often see her blurbing books, so I was very curious what she likes, what she would blurb. I had such a good time with this. I was just pulled in by the writing. This is a very short standalone YA fantasy, and it was actually really well paced. I think that is hard to accomplish, to set up both a world and characters and a mystery in such a short number of pages, and to pace it well and really accomplish that story. And I think that she really did in this book. So this was such a surprise to me because I really went in with little to no knowledge or expectations of this, and it isn't necessarily something I would have picked up otherwise. I kind of just got it because I was curious about what Juliet Marillier would blurb. Next question is new favorite author. Of the new to me authors that I have read this year, I think my favorite is probably Makia Lucier. So Year of the Reaper was the first one that I read from her in January. Then I read her Tower of Winds duology, which I also really enjoyed. Right now I am reading Dragon Fruit, so I'm just making my way through all of her fantasy. She is one historical fiction, but I'm not quite sure if I'm gonna read that or not, but all of her YA fantasy have been so fun. I find her writing very readable. I like her characters. I find them just very like engaging and likable. I think the worlds that she creates are interesting, and her writing, while it's not, I wouldn't necessarily call it super like lyrical or atmospheric, but it does have a very distinct feeling to her books and her writing, even across, you know, the series and standalones that she has. And I just enjoy her vibe. Her books also usually incorporate some element of mystery to them, and I am not usually a mystery person. I don't necessarily like mysteries that much, but I do really like her mysteries. And I think part of that is because her books often have a really good balance between like the mystery and the characters. Since I am such a character reader, I am here for the characters more than the mystery, but I think she does a really good job of balancing the two and tying the mystery to something very personal to the characters, so that even the mystery is about the characters ultimately. Her mysteries also, I say, are just like the right level of, you know, figure out ability for me, so I just find them very fun. So she has quickly become an auto read author for me. Any other fantasy she publishes in the future, I will probably be reading. Newest favorite character. My newest favorite character is definitely Emmerich from the Little Thieves series. I was thinking, you know, before I read that series, I had been thinking like, oh, I don't know if I have a new favorite character for the first half of the year. And then I read Little Thieves and Painted Devils right at the end of the year, and I was like, this is my new favorite character. I love Emmerich so much. He is just a character type that I adore and quickly wins me over, but I think he then, on top of being this character, you know, archetype or trope that I always love, he has additional characteristics that make me love him even more. So he is this type of character who is very like buttoned up by the book, you know, he wants to like follow the rules, he's an investigator, and he wants justice, but underneath all of this like very, you know, perfectionist kind of character, he is a very good person who really cares about like true justice, and he also cares so much for the people around him. And my favorite characteristic is that although he is highly competent, very intelligent, and he's just so like smart and good at his job, when faced with someone he has a crush on, he is so awkward and just does not know what to do with himself, and it is so funny and so endearing, and I love him so much. There are so many things that I love about him that are just in like the details of how he goes about his work, how he treats the person that he's in a relationship with, that like it would take forever to explain to you like all of just like the little choices, the little things that he does that I love about him. Next is a book that made you cry. I don't think I have a book that made me cry. I am not a big crier in general, and I don't often cry at books, so at the moment I can't really think of a book that made me cry in the first half of the year. A book that made you happy, I did a reread of the Heartstopper series, which always makes me happy because it is so wholesome and adorable, and also like I love how much the two of them care about each other and take care of each other. It's just like the sweetest. But for new to me books, I'm gonna go back to Little Thieves and Painted Devils. Like, those books definitely made me happy, especially the romance, and like how much I love Emmerich as a character definitely made me happy, but also just like the relationship and the extreme awkwardness. I love these like awkward, earnest characters. They're so sweet, and it just made me so happy. The most beautiful book you bought or received in the first half of the year. The most physically beautiful books that I have, one, probably The Mercy Makers by Tessa Gratton. This cover is beautiful. But also The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. I got the Barnes & Noble edition, so, you know, under the dust jacket, beautiful. End papers, beautiful. I am not usually a big fan of sprayed edges, but this is an exception. This is beautiful. So those are probably the most physically beautiful books that I got in the first half of the year. And finally, books you need to read by the end of the year. I have so many books that I need to read by the end of the year. I have multiple lists. I have my TBR Clear Out Project bonus round, which if you want to know what's on that TBR, I have a video about that. So definitely all of those books are a top priority. I also have my top 5 books to read in 2025, which I made at the beginning of the year. I think so far I've only read one of the books from that list, so I need to read the other 4. But a book that is not on either of those lists, which I've already talked about, probably Mercy Makers is one of the top books on my list that I need to get to before the end of the year. So that is my mid-year book freak out. I have definitely found some great books in the first half of the year, but I think the second half is gonna be even better. I am so excited for it. How was the first half of your 2025 reading? I would love to know. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.